Hey everybody, this is the second video in my PragerU series. No need for introductions here. This time we're talking about the incredibly odd video, Social Justice Isn't Justice, hosted by Allie Stuckey and released just this month.
The Lord is a God of social justice. Here's the problem. The Bible doesn't actually say that.
So the argument that this video is making is actually kind of complicated. It's about religious people and the ideas of justice that they have. Many synagogues and churches, Allie Stuckey claims, are currently saying that God is the God of social justice, but he isn't. He is simply the God of justice, and for various reasons, Stuckey believes that justice and social justice cannot coexist.
Not if he's consistent. You see, God cannot be the God of justice and social justice because social justice is not just.
Consider the example of a black thief, like a thief who is black. According to justice, what we would have to do with this guy is simple. Figure out if he did the crime and then punish him with an appropriate sentence if he did.
Let's say a man robs a store. Justice demands but one thing: that he be tried in a court of justice and, if he is found guilty, punished.
But according to social justice, we couldn't do any of that. Instead, we would have to let him off easier than a white thief because black people have been historically discriminated against.
Social justice doesn't only ask if the person is guilty. It asks about his economic condition. Is he poor or wealthy? Is he a member of a group that has been historically oppressed?
So because justice and social justice have different and contradictory ends, and because God is the God of justice and not social justice is like bad, or at least not what God wants for us.
That's why the great battle of our time is between Judeo-Christian values and leftist values. The former is rooted in justice. The latter is not.
So, a lot just happened there, and we'll unpack it all eventually. But first off, I feel like I have to say, what is PragerU talking about? One problem in America right now is not that black people are being let off too easy because of racism. I've never even heard anybody suggest we should do such a thing. Actually, surprisingly enough, racism works the opposite way, like to harm black people who are systemically discriminated against at every level of the justice system. The same can be said of the poor versus rich thing that Stuckey brings up.
And that means favoring the have-nots over the haves, the poor over the rich.
Poor people are not currently being unfairly rewarded by the law. In fact, surprisingly, it's the opposite. Rich people can hire expensive attorneys and pay bail and stuff. Poor people can't. They have to rely on overworked public defenders who aren't likely to spend much time on their case. And they often have to stay in jail during the time of their sentencing because they can't afford bail. These proceedings can take a long time, and so this leads to defendants being more likely to plead guilty. And, wild idea, what if the defendant is innocent? Then they are literally going to jail for the crime of being poor. Now, there's obviously so much more I could say about this issue, but I think the point is obvious. The game is not stacked against rich people, does not offer favors to the poor or black, and social justice doesn't exist in anyone's mind or in reality as an escape from justice. Rather, noticing and changing systemic social problems can make the system more just. That way, when we ruin people's lives and incarcerate them because they have to pay for their misdeeds with suffering, we'll be fair about it. So, let me change the topic and ask a question. Why is this video framed in terms of what God wants us to do? I mean, of course, there's the obvious reason. PragerU wants to talk to their largely religious audience, but see, that explanation doesn't really do it for me. Because this video is so unique to the channel in the way that it deploys God. PragerU does make religious videos sometimes, but it's always in the context of making an argument about God. The Bible is good because of this. God creates morality, etc.
Only if there is a God who says murder is wrong Is murder wrong?
The vast majority of the time, even as they clearly have a bias towards Judaism and Christianity, they try to make their arguments as secular as possible. They do not invoke God in their video about how abortion is murder, or their video about how we should be skeptical of evolution, or, as we've already seen, in their videos about how important marriage is. What's more, this is a particularly strange moment to talk about God, right? For one thing, it's not like the American justice system is copy and pasted from the Bible in the first place.
Moses, the greatest lawgiver in history, declares in Deuteronomy, "Follow justice and justice alone."
Moses never said how many years somebody should go to jail if they steal. You know, the modern carceral state didn't exist yet. We made it up. So why are we using the Bible as our primary defense of the justice system in the first place? But far more importantly here, justice is a huge, important concept. The sort of thing that you really want to be correct and convincing about. And yet, here, Stuckey seems all too happy to produce an argument about it that would fail to convince anyone who doesn't want religion to play a role in how we treat criminals. A huge group with both atheists and believers. But this is the argument we get. As an aside, it's actually the only argument we get. The only other time PragerU talks about how justice should work is in their death penalty video, where Dennis Prager is just like, "Come on, let me shoot this guy." That's my take.
If you really do believe these people deserve to keep their lives, well, as I said at the outset, I don't understand you.
I don't even get why you're not letting me kill this guy right now. So, why? Why do they have to make a religious thing about this issue? And I think the answer comes down to one major thing. PragerU is terrified of presenting its image of justice as anything less than the undisputed objective definition of justice itself. In one of the first moments of the video, Allie gives us this definition of justice. Justice is when we get what we deserve. Well, I'm not going to say that this is a bad definition or a good definition, but rather that it is a woefully incomplete definition that leaves me with a lot of questions. For one thing, it is putting a tremendous amount of weight on a here undefined term, deserve. Like, okay, people should get what they deserve. That's almost self-evidently true. But how do we decide when someone does that? Personally, I don't think anyone ever deserves to be brutally punished for their crimes. I think the only good reason we might have for removing violent people from general society for a time is to prevent them from harming others and to hopefully make them less violent. And as such, it shouldn't be positioned as a punishment or a comeuppance in the first place. So, how would PragerU handle my differing account for how people deserve things? But here's another, maybe more important problem. Assuming that justice is when people get what they deserve, PragerU clearly doesn't believe that the government should always be a purveyor of justice. They are a right-wing organization, after all, strong believers in unregulated marketplaces and small governments. And one consequence of that system is that sometimes people won't get what we think is coming to them. A noble and virtuous person dying from poverty and lack of health care doesn't, to me, seem like the fate that they deserved. And yet, PragerU fully advocates for a system wherein that sometimes occurs, where there is no expectation that the state should give people their just desert. So we have to ask, what makes the government a legitimate purveyor of justice in the case where people do crimes, but not the case where they are dying from poverty? In other words, what gives us the positive right to get what we deserve? This is the problem with PragerU's account of justice. It pretends to a sense of universality and coherence when in fact it is incredibly narrow and commonly contested. Why should we seek to harm people even when it won't produce any positive outcome to speak of? Why does someone who commits a crime deserve to lose dignity, deserve to be mistreated for huge stretches of time? And in order to resolve this problem, PragerU must invoke God. must assert that the reason we should embrace this form of justice is that it is an unquestionable good. And see, from that point forward, they don't need to justify anything. Sure, as Stuckey goes on to say, punishing people might provide the victims a sense of catharsis, or help the criminals realize that what they did was wrong.
Justice, in and of itself, is compassionate. First to the victims of crime and to their loved ones, and second to the criminal. How can you become a better human being if you don't first recognize that you've done something wrong?
Sure, she's right that justice is reliant on the truth, but none of this is an actual case for PragerU's vision of justice. The government doesn't generally exist to give people their catharsis, so why should they do it in this case? There are lots of ways to help people realize what they did was wrong. Why would we think that lengthy, awful jail sentences that lead to incredibly high rates of recidivism are the best way to accomplish that goal? Any form of justice needs to be reliant on the truth. It's not some special thing about PragerU's justice. But of course, them giving these hollow justifications for their ideas doesn't really mean anything, right? Because PragerU is just talking about God stuff to God people. They don't have to be accountable to any kind of moral thought, any implications this might have on what we do in America to American criminals. They are simply defining justice in the only way it should be defined. And that's not them talking, that's the Bible, somehow.
You'll find a lot of references to justice in the Bible, but you'll never find it preceded by the word social.
You know, I think this video is a great example of why it's such a trap to only be responsive to the arguments of videos like this. Because, yes, PragerU is constructing a fake enemy here. A group of social justice warriors who want to give poor people lollipops when they commit murder or something like that. And yes, they are doing that very clearly to deflect from the obvious racism and classism that pervades our justice system. But see, all that's the thing that PragerU likes doing most. It is their comfort food, and conveniently it generates the most agreeable critics possible. People who fundamentally agree with them on how the justice system should work, but who are nonetheless concerned, very reasonably concerned, with some problems the system might have. But no matter what, we cannot turn our attention to the elephant in the room, the system itself. If it is humane, if it has good reason to be like this, if it is just. All those questions have already been decided for us. We have already moved on. Anyway, that's the end of this video. And if you want to go even deeper down this rabbit hole, I hope you'll join me next week in the final video of this series. Hey there! Do you like Mario? Do you like watching people play Mario games? Are you angry at our justice system and wish it wasn't so biased against poor and black people? Well, it's your lucky day, King. On June 6th, 3 p.m. Eastern Time, I'll be playing Mario games for 24 plus hours for the organization The Bail Project. Earlier in this video, I mentioned how awful cash bail is, how it plays into other problems in our justice system. And this is an organization that's trying to help that problem. They give money across the country to people who need bail, and I think that's great. So I'm going to be 100% completing Super Mario 64, Super Mario Bros. 3, maybe a third Mario game, if time permits. And I hope we raise some money together. Okay, bye. Hope you come.